congregation, but you can think about loving difficult people in the church in terms of the universal church, like all Christians, the church all across the globe. You've got that person down the street that goes to a different church that drives you crazy. You've got that family member that claims to be a Christian that just never seems to try to prove it with their actions. We have all sorts of Christians that are tough to love. We don't necessarily make it easy. And so I thought we needed to dedicate a whole week to it. And really it's important because I feel like anytime we see love, when it seems to fail us, we start to question our faith. When love falters, that's like the bedrock, the foundation of our faith. And so we're either saying, well, either God's word isn't true or God's love isn't in me or in them. And what's going on here? And we spent our first message in this series, Tough Love, about what are love and some of its limits. And there's a couple things love can't do. Love can't decide for somebody else. Love can't guarantee a correct outcome to a situation. You can't guarantee gratitude or proper treatment for yourself. You're going to love somebody despite what that outcome brings. And then our love can't sustain myself or the person we're trying to love, right? We all ultimately have to go to the source. God is our source. And so it's not a matter of whether my love fails me or that person that was supposed to care for me fails me. It's God's love that sustains me. And then last week we talked about how to love difficult people, and that applies to this week's message very much. We talked about humans have 3 legitimate needs. These aren't sinful desires. These are good desires. Every human being, every single person has the common ground of these needs that you have. You need acceptance. You need to feel like you're known, like people know who you are, like you can be who you're yourself, and that's not like a bad thing. You want to be known, to be understood. You need significance. You need to feel like you're special, like you're part of the group, like God has made you in his image. And you need to feel secure. That's shelter and food and safe relationships. All 3 of those things are legitimate human needs. And so when we talk about how do you love difficult people, it's really simple. You just, love is meeting needs. You find that need in somebody's life. And whether you feel the affection or you're doing it out of a sense of Christian duty, you can love somebody by meeting one of those needs. And so you can take somebody that's just sinning against you and you're turning the other cheek constantly and they're constantly insulting you and your faith, and you can say, I hear them insulting me, but really what I need to be hearing is their need for significance, or the fact that they don't feel secure in any of their relationships, or the fact that they don't feel safe around Christians because of their upbringing or something they've been through. And so you need to be able to parse out how people treat you and find that need and meet it, and you will show them love. You will love that difficult person. And loving difficult people in the church is no different. In the church, we have all of those needs every single day. And something we talked about last week was the fact that sinning, one definition for sin, at least, or at least in this context, you can say is that sin is just a wrong way of satisfying a legitimate need. And so I come to church and, man, I need to feel safe. I need to feel safe, right? That's legitimate. But if I go about it the wrong way, I might actually be sinning against my brothers and sisters in Christ. I need to feel safe, so I'm coming here and I'm agitated and I'm looking for help about one thing or another, and maybe I achieve that try to satisfy that legitimate need in an incorrect way. And we need to be able to give each other the grace that we're not going to be perfect whenever we try and self-advocate for something we need, and the church is never going to respond perfectly to our needs because we're all fallible people. And so here we are with a foundation of faith that's built on love, a loving Savior that's perfect, that actually did love us perfectly, and we're all going to be imperfect representations of that our entire lives. Josh Story, the guy that discipled me, would always say, not going to church because of hypocrites is like not going to the gym because of fat people. Like, I thought that was so funny. Because, yeah, you go to church and you're going to find a hypocrite in every single one of us. And that's just, I mean, who's the bigger hypocrite? The person that's too good for the rest of those hypocrites? I'd say yes, right? There's so many of us every single time when we come to church and to other Christians with the expectation that they will exemplify God's love perfectly, we are setting themselves up for failure and ourselves up for failure. There is something beautiful about what we can get from one another. But at the end of the day, it's only God's love that sustains us. So I can't be God to you. Neither can our deacons. Neither can anybody. Nobody can embody God perfectly, despite our best trying. That's why we do have these spiritual gifts that Tom talked about, where my giftings are going to be awesome in one place, but where they're not there, I'm going to need your giftings to fill that gap. And as the church, as you and I have different giftings, different ways of loving each other, different ways of supporting the local church and the local body, we can be better representations of that bigger body, that universal church, but we can actually love people better as a group, because it's not all just hanging on me. It's not all just hanging on you. If you bring that friend to church and they're struggle just to be around, and then you bring them here, it's like, hey, at least like we can start to spread out some of the need, because I can't do it all, right? And we need to be looking at each other like that on a Sunday morning. Not just, hi, how are you? But hi, what's a place I can be blessing you? Or what's a place that I can be looking out for you and caring for you? Yesterday, Nino, right here, he was, one of the only able-bodied men in the church here. Sorry, guys. But I needed to move some furniture in my house, and so I borrowed him. We're repainting some stuff, and I borrowed him to get all the couches and things and tables out of my house. And then it was like, well, we've already got him. Let's go to Kay's house. She had a sofa we needed to move, and was like a sleeper sofa, so it was like 400 pounds. And he's like on his hands and knees lifting it up, trying to get it out of the doorway because it was just so hard. And then we go to Mike and Lucille, and Mike and Lucille had a table that needed moved, and it was a whole day of just moving furniture. And man, I might have giftings, and I might be a generally well-built guy, as long as I've got long sleeves on and you can't see the dad bod underneath. But my strength by itself couldn't do it, and so I had somebody that came in and stepped up, helped me out with a need, and we got to bless 3 families that day, right? So nobody should go into loving difficult people in the church expecting, what's the vengeance message I get to hear about, how people just fail each other? Because really, we have to be really careful when we do that. If the church has failed you, I believe you 100%. But what other choice do we have than to try again? Because we can't do this alone, right? And so as the church, we have a couple of expectations for what our stance, I guess, should be in conflict. In conflict, what should a couple of assumptions be that we have when we're dealing with disagreements, bad relationships, strife, and whatever else? The first thing that I think we need to remember is that conflict is given by God. This is something I didn't think I'd be saying from here. But 1 Corinthians 11, 17 and 19, it says, "Now giving this next instruction, I do not praise you, because when you come together not for the better, but for the worse." Paul's telling the church in Corinth that they are better off staying home than coming together and gathering like they're told to in Hebrews 10:24. It says, "Let us not neglect to meet, but spur one another on towards love and good deeds." These guys are told, you're better off if you just stay home. When you get together, it's actually everybody's worse off. And this is what he says. "For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions that exist among you. And in part, I believe it." So he's saying, yeah, I know you guys. You're a bunch of rascals. Like, of course there's a conflict between you guys. But he says something really interesting in verse 19. He says, "For there also have been factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you." In a sense, he's saying that, of course, there's factions and divisions, and there's going to be times of conflict, because God tests us, right? He uses conflict outside of the church to test us. He uses conflict inside your life to purify and make you holy, and he's saying that it's going to happen the same exact way in the church. Of course there's divisions among you. There must be divisions among you, so that we can figure out who God approves. Oh man. All right. So we're starting off with church conflict is given by God in a weird way, so that we can figure out who's truly approved, who's truly walking with Christ. There's disagreements in Christian thought about whether somebody can lose their salvation or not, whether somebody can, who turns away from Christ and cheats on his wife or something like that, whether he was really saved in the first place, right? And so people will argue about this all day long, but both schools of thought understand that there are people that confess to be Christians that end up not really being saved, right? So we can stand on that solid ground and say that Whether you believe that people can lose their salvation, or whether you believe that people that like walk away from Christ, maybe they were never really saved in the first place. We don't have to get into that argument today. We can say that there are people in every single church that confess to be Christians that are being tested, and some of us, our true colors are going to show. We're not really on Christ's side. And so conflicts they come to purify us, to purify the church, and to show who's really approved. And so there is where we have to look at conflict, and we have to say every conflict is given to us by God to be able to see if he can refine us a little bit more and approve us as his children in the church. The good thing about this is it's not assuming that one side or the other has to fail. I think that's really important to remember. This isn't saying that like God is playing eeny, meeny, miny, mo. He's saying we're going to put some conflict in the church. There's going to be some factions and divisions, and we're going to see who approved. And it might be both parties. And that's the good thing, is that if you look at conflict inside the church in a godly way, there doesn't have to be a loser. You can have greater unity. And so we have to be looking at, are we fighting fair? Are we fighting for our side of the argument, or are we fighting for better church unity? And so Christians, we always have to determine to maintain unity. That needs to be our posture and our stance when it comes to church conflict, loving difficult people in the church. We determine to maintain unity. An excerpt from what Tom read, it says, "Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined together and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." So we speak the truth in love to each other. I might disagree with you, and I'll tell you the truth about it, but I'm going to do it in a loving way. We grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is become in every respect the matured body of him who is the head, that is Christ. The whole body, being joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in true love as each part does its work. Our posture in disagreement, in relational breakages, in differences in vision or approach or strategy, we need to be understanding that as I'm being tested in conflict and as you're being tested in conflict with me, we are being tested to see if we're going to have a posture that maintains unity. Are we growing together in love under the headship of Christ, supporting the body, or are we breaking from that body? It sounds like a bit that we'll be seen and tested if we're approved by whether or not we're seeking that unity. So first thing we got to do is determine to maintain unity. We maintain unity. There's so many times in the Bible that we see there's a bit of a hierarchy in how Christians ought to treat people. And we always think of like, who's the person you ought to love best? Well, it's the lost person. Well, actually, that's really, really, really important. But actually, there's so many verses that talk about loving the brothers and sisters in the body first. Colossians 4:6, it says, "Let your conversations always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." That's talking about how to answer outsiders. That totally applies to how to deal with conflict in the church. But we need to be having grace to the outsiders. But Galatians 6:9 is really, really important because it says, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, but especially to those in the family of believers." Preferential treatment belongs to you and me. Because if we're building a church that doesn't build up people, why do we exist? If we're building up a church that grows and gets larger on the backs of broken families and frustrated Christians and spiritual death, we're building a bigger and bigger monster that doesn't look like the church. We need to be having a preferential treatment towards loving one another so that people that are here are loved and are better off for being a part of our family, not just that the church is better off for having them here, right? You can have a growth in numbers that doesn't grow a single soul. We want to grow souls. So we have to be able to determine to love our fellow Christians best so that when that outsider comes in, they're coming into a family that's going to be healthy for them. So that we need to determine to maintain unity. We need to understand that we love Christians best as a matter of calling, as a matter of understanding if we're really living out our faith. And the second thing we need to remember is that we would rather be wronged than to be proven right. In church conflict, we would rather be wronged than to be proven right. You see this in 1 Corinthians 6. It talks about lawsuits among believers, and Paul is livid. He says, if any of you has a dispute with one another, do you dare take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? Or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that you will judge angels? How much more the things of this life? Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, do not ask for ruling from those whose way of life is scorned by the church. I say this to shame you. It is possible that there is nobody among you who is it possible that there is nobody among you who is wise enough to judge a dispute between believers? So this is saying that why would you take this to court and like show your division out in the middle of public and just make an embarrassment of Christ's sacrifice and what he did for this body, right? And this is where it gets to the part where we would rather be wronged than be proven right. He says, but instead, one takes his brother to court and in front of unbelievers. The very fact that there's lawsuits among you means that you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong, and you do this to your brothers and sisters. These people are failing to show the preferential, loving treatment to their fellow believers. Wouldn't they rather be wronged than embarrass God and his sacrifice by publicly fleecing out a conflict in court? Wouldn't they rather take that time of saying, I can turn the other cheek for my brother if I can do it for an unbeliever, and just take the loss so that they can honor Christ's sacrifice and the unity? They have a stance and a posture towards maintaining unity over their own self-interests. That is very important when it comes to church growth. If we're a church that wants to grow, if we're a church that's posing to grow, if we believe that that's going to happen, we can believe that God's going to be bringing more people in here, that there's going to be like rough relationships and there's going to be opportunities for change that might disagree with us. And we have to have a posture towards being wronged over being right for the sake of unity. We have to be we just have to be ready that more conflict is going to happen as we grow. We have to be understanding that God and his body matters more than us and our preferences. The third thing I want us to notice is that God is just and his opinion matters most. So there's times where Christians can truly, truly wrong you. There's times where sadly, we are not exempt from really just betrayal and victimizing brothers and sisters. It has probably happened to you, and if it hasn't, stick around, it will. Sadly, it will. We can really mess this up. And it is God's opinion that matters most, right? God is just. He will judge what is right. We are told to remember not to take vengeance for ourselves because he says, I am the Lord. Justice or vengeance is mine. I will repay. Maybe people don't know the true story, but God does. Whose opinion matters more? Is it God's opinion of who you are and what's going on and God's opinion of your character that matters more? Or is it the public's opinion? Whose approval are you really seeking, man or God's? He's saying, I understand what's going on. Vengeance is mine. I will repay. You can take the loss every once in a while and just try and lean in and hope that God can redeem something through a terrible circumstance because it's worth church unity. Romans 12:13, it says, share with the saints who are in need. So that's the saints, not just the poor. That's the saints. That's the people within the body. It says, practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. What if that's about people in the church too? What if that's about people in the church too? Bless those who persecute you. Jesus was most often persecuted by people that should have been on the same ground as him, people that understood the law, people that knew better. Jesus' own ministry, personal discipleship, he spent 3 years with people he loved, he shared his life with, and he still was persecuted by people that he couldn't have loved any better. He was a perfect man, and he lived with them, he walked with them. They went on boating trips. I mean, technically they were just traveling on boats, right? They had cookouts, feeding the 5,000. Like, they spent time together. And he did everything he possibly could. He never faulted them a single time, and he was still betrayed by Judas. He still had all but one of his disciples fail him in his moment of need. And this says, bless those who persecute you. What if that is about your best friend in church? What if that is about the person that mentored you or the person you're mentoring? Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Man, there is such a high standard for how we treat each other in the church. It goes on to say, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but enjoy the company of the lowly. This isn't some race of status or a hierarchy of who's the most powerful person in the church or has the most sway or most influence. We are told to rejoice and weep when our brothers and sisters are there. We're told to care about even the least popular, the most despised person in the church. We're told not to be proud, but enjoy the company of the lowly. Do not be conceited. You're not here for you. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Carefully consider what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible on your part, live at peace with everyone. If it is possible on your part, live at peace with everyone. That is our posture in loving difficult people in the church. You don't have an excuse. You're going to be wrong, just like Jesus was. You're going to have disagreement. You're being tested. If it is, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That doesn't mean that at the end of the day, you guys are going to be best friends. Sometimes people walk out. Sometimes people take a grudge to their grave, whether it's justified or not. But as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not avenge yourselves, beloved, but leave room for God's wrath. And there that verses that I referenced. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. Meet his needs of security. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil with evil, but overcome evil with good. In church, and when it comes to matters of integrity, matters of worship, matters of whatever else we can disagree with in the church, it is super important that we don't betray God's love in the pursuit of God's love. We don't overcome evil with evil, but evil with good. The very fact that there is lawsuits among us, these people had already been defeated, right? We need to be posturing ourselves towards church unity. God's opinion of your character matters most. He maintains justice, and he'll show who he approves. All things will ultimately come to light. So when that next time that there's somebody in church that's just driving you crazy, I want you to take a second and do some introspection and say, what is God trying to get out of me in this moment? Is he trying to test me? Is he testing my faith? Is he going to show me something new about his character that I can try and embody? Is he trying to test to see if I love the church or if I just love going to church on Sundays? Because trust me, if you don't love God's church, God's bride, there's going to be no reason to come on a Sunday morning in the middle of church conflict. Actually, maybe I'll take that back. I've noticed a bit of a generational difference between people my age and people maybe a little older. People my age, we're all about the cancel culture. We will love something with all our heart until it does us wrong once, and then we're out the door and we'll never try again. We do that with relationships too. Oh man, I love you so much, and this is so exciting to see you every Sunday, until like there's just the slightest bit of friction, and then you've blocked their number, you never talk to them again, and you're out, right? Man, if you don't love the church as a millennial, there's going to be no reason to come the second there's another person in the room, because you're going to have friction, right? For somebody that's older, a lot of times I've seen there's people that would rather be right and and come to church to spurn people, not because they actually love anybody there, but just because they want to like really make sure that everybody knows they're upset, right? And so you can mess up both ways, whether you're here or not. Like doesn't matter if you're young or old, we can all mess up, right? But we have to be able to love God's body, the church, love one another, because otherwise there's going to be no reason to come if this is just tradition in the face of difficulty. By loving God's people, we have a chance to love God. We have a chance to express God's love and experience it inside ourselves. And that's an awesome opportunity. Of course, there must be factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you. If you and a friend, or if you and another group or faction in a church are both in disagreement over something and both truly understanding that you're digging into this conflict for the sake of reconciliation, for the sake of church unity, both groups or factions might be approved. If you're truly fighting for unity in the faith, there's no reason why there has to be a loser. And so the content of our disagreement, the way we go about these things, it has to be honoring that final outcome that we want. In Matthew 5, it talks about if you're standing at the altar and there you realize that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come back and offer your gift. God is a God of reconciliation. He cares about reconciliation more than he does sacrifice. Even in the temple system before Jesus' sacrifice, he cared more about reconciliation, a broken and contrite heart before God, before the person you've wronged, than he did sacrifice. If you want to please God, be reconciled to your brother or sister. And notice this is the person that realizes they've wronged somebody else. They're not waiting for somebody to come and offer forgiveness. If there's a place where you can say, hey, you and I have had a disagreement, and I stepped over this line, I am truly sorry about this. And that doesn't mean you're conceding the whole argument, but there has to be a place where we can understand that loving God and loving his people is more important than being right. That God cares more about our affection for one another, embodying his reconciliation to us and how we reconcile to one another, even as we grow, especially as we grow, because the conflicts are going to come. So, just to summarize, love is meeting needs. All people need to feel accepted, significant, and secure in church and outside of church. In conflict, we determine to maintain unity. We would rather be wronged than proven right. And we know that God's opinion matters most, that he maintains justice and that he will show who is approved, and all things will come to light in the end. But it's unity and reconciliation that you and I are contending for, because that's our brother and sister that earns and deserves preferential treatment, because that's the kind of church we want to have, one that builds people up and shows them love and leaves them better than we found them, because that's who Christ is to us. We want to be that to other people as much as we can. Let's go ahead and have our worship team come back up here. I think today's was a little shorter, but the sign pretty much had it anyways. So thank you guys for listening.